In the Old Testament, we read of a young Jewish woman named Esther who lost her parents while still a young child. Her cousin Mordecai took pity on her and took her in and raised her. Mordecai took good care of his little cousin, and Esther developed into a young woman of amazing character. Now, in those days, the Jews were ruled by a people known as the Medes and Persians. Their leader was King Ahasuerus, who, like all kings in those days, collected women the way some people collect coins. One day the king was throwing a party for his officials, and when his queen refused to come and present herself at the party, the king was furious, and his advisors suggest that he replace her. They recommended an empire-wide search for beautiful ladies, bringing the top contenders to the king's palace, where the king would sleep with one after another until he found a suitable replacement, to which he readily agreed. As the king's servants scoured the kingdom, it was only natural that Esther would be noticed and included among these new potential wives and concubines for the king. Although she wasn't from a rich family and she didn't wear fine clothes, her natural and stunning beauty could not be hidden. She was forcibly taken from her home with Mordecai and housed with all the other young ladies who had been collected for the king's pleasure. Now, this could not have been an easy or a pleasant time for either Esther or Mordecai. She now faced a forced marriage to a man of another culture, and she would be probably one of hundreds of his ladies brought to him a few times a year for sex and otherwise left to live out her life with all his other women. When Esther's night came to sleep with the king, he was totally smitten with her. And in his mind, there was no point in looking further. He had found his replacement for the former Queen Vashti. The winds of God's providence were blowing, and they had blown Esther into a place of phenomenal prestige and influence in the enormous empire of the Medes and Persians, which controlled 120 provinces throughout the Middle East. It probably wasn't more than a few years before a terrible crisis developed. The king's right-hand man, a vain, wicked individual named Haman, conceived a plot to annihilate the entire Jewish race. It had to do with Esther's cousin Mordecai, who was the one person who refused to bow before Haman whenever he passed. Haman hated Mordecai for this, but rather than attempting to do away with Mordecai alone, he schemed to kill all the Jews throughout all the provinces and put an end to this race he considered stubborn and insubordinate. Haman convinced the king to give permission for him to organize a day of slaughter, where the king's soldiers and any citizens who wanted to join in would be encouraged to kill the Jews and plunder all their possessions. A date was set for the month of Adar, and Haman gleefully looked forward to the day when not only Mordecai, but his entire race would be permanently removed from the face of the earth. Mordecai learned of this evil plot and sent Esther a message telling her that she must go see the king and persuade him to spare the Jews. Now, Esther was a little bit nervous about this, as it was strictly against protocol to go to the king unless requested. In fact, the punishment for this transgression was death. Additionally, the king had not called for her in the last month, and Esther was wondering if she had lost favor with him. She sent to Mordecai informing him of these things and suggesting this could mean death for her. It was at this point Mordecai replied with his famous declaration, "If you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther did indeed go to the king, was received warmly, and persuaded him to issue a contrary decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves and ensuring their survival. But Mordecai's statement echoes across the centuries, even to this day. Who knows whether you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And clearly the answer was she had indeed been placed in her queenly position for exactly that time. She became God's chosen means to save the entire Jewish people. God is the great positioner of His people. Most of our own stories are not nearly so dramatic as Esther's, but the principle never changes. Whenever God wants to use us, He must position us in the ideal place where we may be the most useful. For some, it may mean a different job. For some, a different state. He positions us by leading us to just the right husband or wife, just the right church, giving us the precise skills or the knowledge that we'll need to fulfill His perfect plan for us. If you've been saved through faith in Jesus Christ and are abiding in Jesus, you can be sure you're being positioned by God for maximum fruitfulness. Where you end up, who you marry, what career you pursue, even your natural inclinations and interests have been given you by your faithful Creator, that He may use you for His glory and the good of people. You are being positioned. Though you may not be conscious of it, though it may seem that your life is a huge mess, and you may even feel, as Esther no doubt felt, that you're in the midst of a hurricane and you're being blown about by random winds of circumstances, you will finally settle down in the precise place God has ordained for you, and you will be prepared to exercise the ministry He has planned for you in Jesus Christ.